being a person of color, I get the sense that there wasn't always that relationship between the police and people of color, and I thought that both sides could learn. The officers that didn't really know African Americans had their certain ideas about them, and I wanted to prove them that they were wrong, and I wanted to show members of the African American community that certain predisposed kind of thoughts about police officers, I wanted to show them that they were wrong too, and I think that for me that's kind of kept me on
a daunting
path.
task.
Well, it's kind of kept me on path because for me, again, I ride in a unique position, not only as an African American police officer, but I also have a white mother. So my mother's white, my father's black, I'm a cop, so I see things from a perspective that none of this made sense to me.
Yeah, that's why
people cannot get along makes zero sense to me.
Here.
Right.
Blacks are policed differently. Even after I was on the job, I realized that. One of my experiences was when I went to my, after my break-in station, I got transferred to my home station, which was unusual in your first year. But at that time, state police used to hold the warrants for all the cities and towns in their area, usually 14 to 15 cities and towns. And what I noticed, and in those days they put your race on the warrant, I noticed that I was in a station that was halfway between Boston and Providence on a major interstate, and in a state where people of color back in the 70s only represented less than 10% of the population of the Commonwealth. But when I looked at the warrants and you look at the colors on the warrants, every time a town would call and you pull their warrant, I was amazed by the large number of BMs that had warrants.
And by that you mean
black males. So I knew it was different, and I was a very active trooper, and I often made arrests. And I remember someone taking note that says, "Gee, Shell, you arrest a lot of white people." And I says, yeah, but the difference is, I'm not picking them, they're picking me.
Good way to put it.
In other words, I only noticed them is because they were breaking the law, whether they were speeding, whether they were operating under, a lot of operating unders back in those times. And I said, and I had very high activity, and they questioned me on that. I said, well, listen, we've got 35 people in the station, and you guys are all looking for the male of color to go down the street, down the road, for you to make a stop. So 35 of you are looking for the same less than 10% of the population. I got the whole other 90%.
You got targets above the 20.
And I don't pick them, they're just there. They pick me.
How about you, Ed? How'd you change from reality before and afterwards? What have you noted?
Well, I just have to go back to one thing that Al said, and I think that I didn't realize how common of a theme it was. Someone said to me, remember now, you're not black, you're blue. Mm-hmm. And I thought to myself, when that was said to me, I'm thinking, are you going up to the white cops going, hey, you're not white, you're blue? Mm-hmm. So that struck me.
There's a line that
struck me wrong. But yeah, go look, and about what's different, I think the cops, for the most part, are all trying to do the right thing. I will say, like anything else, society judges everybody based on the performance of the worst 1 or 2%. But I will say that when I was doing my break-in, I was riding with an officer. He pulled up to a group of young black kids that were standing on the corner. Hey, move along, move along. So we pulled across the street, and then there was a similar-sized group of similar age white kids across the street. And I'm not being a wise guy. I just said, hey, let's go move them. He goes, for what? And it hit me. I'm like, well, what? I said, well, what are they doing any different than what they're doing? And he says, oh, it's going to be like that. He was immediately offended. So, and I don't think that he was an overt racist, but he saw something over there that bothered him that didn't bother him with the other group. And I've seen a lot of that through my career. And we try to have that discussion, especially in a supervisory position with people. Yep. And you try to have that discussion. It's a very difficult discussion to have because they immediately go on the defensive. Are you accusing me of being a racist? Or are you? I said, no, I'm pointing out behavior. I'm pointing out that there's something in your upbringing, in your socialization, in your culturalization that causes you to draw your attention to this person as opposed to another person. And that's really come glaringly clear to me.
Mark, how about you?
I don't know that I saw a big difference. I always viewed police officers, like I said, with respect, but I know there were good ones and bad ones. When I was growing up, before I was a police officer, I was actually singled out. I was standing with a bunch of friends of mine. They were white guys, and someone had stolen a pocketbook who was a black guy who ran by us. He didn't look anything like me.
You
He
fit
was
the
skinny and
Yes,
much
right.
taller than I was. And the police came by and they grabbed me, threw me in the car, and they took me to the old lady's house and they said, "Is this the guy?" And she said, "No." Thank goodness. Had she said yes, my life might have been different.
Brown case did not end segregation and racism in this country. And I was on state police in the mid-'70s in the Boston area with the busing and all those issues. And you saw the ugly head of racism that was no different than it was in the 50s or the 40s or the 30s.
Okay.
And right now, in fact, even in this time, you can see the ugly head of racism. It never really died. It may be different, and people may deny it that they're racist today. Whereas in the 50s, even the 60s, when we had presidential candidates whose platform was racism and separatism.
To be perfectly honest, is driven by the type of incident. I mean, I really don't think that most cops go into anything saying this operator is white, green, purple, whatever. I think a lot of it's driven by the dynamics of the type of incident. But I will say this: I don't think that this implicit bias stuff that Dal is talking about is not necessary. We have to get over the fact that people think that that's evil. It's not evil. What is it's fear. And I noticed that the interactions from white officers with people of color, if white officers are used to interacting with them, they're familiar with them, there's no fear. They treat them fine. It's the ones that don't know any people of color that are apprehensive. And it's that fear that causes that conflict that sometimes ends up in the use of force. Because both the operator is in fear and the officer's in fear. Now what you have is two people in a state of stress where they don't think clearly and make poor decisions, and it causes a lot of conflict.
Mark, how about you?
Yeah, I would agree with what the chief just said. I think it really does come down to some of it is, however, racism. And I know when I was in the barracks, many times, especially when I first started in the state police, you would hear people talking if they didn't realize I was there.
Yeah.
And the things they would be talking about this person of color they stopped or whatever, was pretty horrible. And you would hear some pretty bad things. But in general, the stop, if it's a legal stop, they all start the exact same. And then people have their own, feelings towards race or different issues that might take it somewhere else. As far as stopping a black guy like myself, stopping a white guy, I've had very few problems, but I have had situations where I've stopped someone, or I can remember one particular situation where I was the training trooper and I had a boot with me, and as I'm talking to this middle-aged white guy, I forget if it was an accident or whatever, my boot was white. He was not hearing a word that I said. No matter how much I talked,
Yep.
he believed the white guy was the senior officer.
Yeah.
And I got to at one point where I stepped back and said, okay, talk to him. Because the boot knew nothing.
Yeah.
He'd never been on the road before. But this guy just couldn't comprehend that I would be the one who was going to run this show.
Listen, to prejudge a situation is not a bad thing. It protects you. But what can make it bad is that when you react fully and overly committed to what you may suspect, rather than checking out the situation before you react.
Especially for those out in TV land. We talk about equipment. People think about our accoutrements on our belt. When I talk about equipment, a lot of teaching, I'm talking about up here. I'm talking
absolutely.
about being armed with the communication skills, the perceptive skills, the decision-making skills to know this is not going to go well. What's safest for me, and what can I do to make sure we keep the community safe, at the same time keeping myself safe, but let's try not to kill this person either. And the thing that we use the most every day to de-escalate things, or even in interview and interrogation, are our communication skills.
Yeah.
And it's the thing that we train on the least. You know, we don't really evaluate for that. I don't know how it was in your training, but we didn't do
No,
much
I think
with
you're
that.
right. And I'll also say that one of the things police officers don't do, most police officers don't think it's okay to take a step back.
A tactical
If you
retreat,
are
right?
afraid of someone for whatever the reason, and it could be a justifiable fear, you can use verbal language to de-escalate by telling them, sit in the vehicle, let me check something, and then you can call for backup, and then you can regroup again.
Right.
And some cops are afraid to do that. They think it's now or never. And sometimes
There's no rush.
that just
They
leads
start
to
down
lethal
that
force,
road,
because
right, yeah.
if they think they're going to lose that fight,
Defend our positions. Put the defense down for a second and actually listen to what the other side is saying. Because if a cop is sitting here being told by a citizen or a group of citizens, we fear you, stop trying to defend, hey, you shouldn't be. It's no. Say, okay, why?
Yeah.
What is it in my behavior that's causing you to be afraid of me? And the cops, we need to ask ourselves, first of all, we have to admit that we're afraid sometimes. And we need to ask ourselves, what is it about people that scare us? And until we can have those frank, open, real talk discussions, I don't think we're going to get too far.